Hey team, and welcome to another video in the Astrological Magical Elections video series. And today we're going to talk about talismanic election opportunities that are going to be available to us between our Scorpio New Moon until our Taurus Full Moon. And this lunation has been kind of an interesting one. We kind of have just come out of the tunnel, like the other side of the tunnel, we'll say, with all of the planetary retrogrades that we had to deal with. Now everybody's moving direct and things are generally, moving forward much better. But now we've kind of gotten this weird situation where several planets have sort of taken each other out of commission, very much limiting the electional opportunities that we have to work with because the ascendants aren't going to work with us the way that we need them to. But we are able to have a few electional opportunities during this 2-week period, which is really great. Anytime during the waxing moon phase, you of course want to be able to get as many potential electional opportunities as you can, just because the waxing moon is more growth oriented, and that tends to be what people really need most of the time. So having more options for that growth to like hone in on exactly what kind of growth somebody needs, typically what we want, but we have to be careful of our general electional considerations for what we can and cannot do safely, basically. So before we go ahead and dive into our individual election opportunities, I wanted to take a second to talk about sort of what's ruining it for everybody, what the planetary conditions are that's really limiting the electional opportunities that we have. So one of my best pieces of advice that I can give you when you start to make your own talismanic elections or start to sort of scrutinize or explore options for yourself is to just take into consideration what ascendant signs you can utilize. So the ascendant and the ruler of the first house represent the person that the talisman is going to work for. And most of the time, all the time really, we want this planet to be well placed or at least not afflicted. Like unafflicted is sort of like the baseline, because the implication there is that the talisman does something untoward to the person that it's for. And this can range like all kinds of things, either from just not really doing much to kind of working in a way that the person doesn't want, things like that. Like, but there's usually some sort of like negative or unwanted repercussions for this. So making sure the ruler of the first house is well placed or at least unafflicted is a good first step to getting what you need done. So taking our current conditions as an example, Aries, the signs Aries and Scorpio cannot operate as ascendant signs for elections during this time period because while Mars is in Scorpio, which is great, Mars is also square Saturn in Aquarius, which is not great. That's a pretty bad affliction. The signs Taurus and Libra are much better off. Venus, while not in a sign that she does well in, she'll go from Sagittarius to Capricorn, I believe, during this time period. She is fine. Like, she's not afflicted by Mars or Saturn. She's not combust the sun, things like that. When it comes to the signs Gemini and Virgo, we have kind of another issue. Mercury at this point will be either conjoined Mars, which isn't good, or starting to apply to the conjunction of the sun, which is also not good. So Mercury can't operate as a ruler of the first house, which takes Gemini and Virgo off of the table. Cancer is probably the best sign generally to utilize, unless there's like a bad affliction with like Mars or Saturn in Cancer or like opposite Cancer, things like that. But just because the moon moves so quickly, it's usually easy to find times when it's both good and bad to use Cancer. Leo is another one that's kind of similar. With the sun, as long as he's not afflicted by Mars or Saturn, he tends to be fine because he can't conjoin himself, so he's saved from some of the more combust type considerations that we would usually take into consideration for this. So for this point, the sun kind of starts off in the iffy zone where he starts off kind of square Saturn, but then as the weeks move on, he starts to separate from that square and becomes more usable as a ruler of the first house. And then with Jupiter, it's a little bit more interesting because while the sign of Sagittarius using as a, generally we'll say, you can use Jupiter at this time period for talismanic elections. Jupiter in Aquarius is too far from Saturn to be conjoined. Saturn have to deal with that, and also far enough away from Mars to not have to worry about the square aspect. So Jupiter tends to be fine. So that means Sagittarius can be utilized as an election ascendant, and we will actually utilize it a lot during this 2 weeks, as you'll see. But Pisces is not a good one to utilize at this time because if Pisces is on the ascendant, Jupiter is probably in the 12th house, and the ruler of the first house in a cadent house is not super great, but I tend to not really care a lot of the times. But when it comes to the 12th house, I really do care. So I don't like the ruler of the first house in the 12th, and I tend to avoid it at all costs, and I would also recommend avoiding it at all costs. And then finally, Capricorn and Aquarius signs can't be used because Saturn is square Mars. So Mars and Saturn have sort of mutually assured destroyed themselves or one another, I guess, at this time. Which is really too bad because I thought that on the 12th and the 14th there were going to be opportunities for Mars and Saturn talismans, but then I just forgot that they're like literally exactly square one another, so that's not good. So we're going to go ahead and dive into our electional opportunities themselves, starting with the Australian continent for what is available for there, because they only have 2 opportunities, which is the least amount for any of the locations that I typically survey. So we're going to talk about them and kind of get them out of the way. Sorry, Australia. So our first electional opportunity for the Australian continent is going to be for November 9th at around 1:30 in the morning, so put on that cup of coffee. And this is going to be an opportunity for a 22nd Lunar Mansion talisman. Oh, actually, one thing I forgot to say. For those of you who have watched these videos for a little bit, you'll probably notice that these charts look a little bit different from what they do normally, and that's because I kind of went out of my way to approach the elections a little bit differently, because I knew that we had kind of the deck stacked against us about what ascendants we could and couldn't utilize, so I wanted to make sure that I got kind of the most out of what we could possibly get. So usually when I do electionals for this video series, I tend to make them very newbie friendly, like very beginner friendly, very safe. So what I usually do is I just look for when the moon is on the ascendant in the midheaven, and if that, like if her application and conditions can match up with making a good talisman for whatever lunar mansion she falls into. That tends to be how I handle lunar mansion talismans. So in this instance, I wasn't really able to do that very successfully. So instead, how I approached it was more like, the moon is in this mansion, whatever mansion she's in during the day. What would be my best opportunity for a usable talismanic election? That's kind of how I went with this. So you'll see the moon in different houses than the first and the 10th house in a lot of these charts, because I wanted to kind of see what I might be able to do more with that in a time period which is a little bit more constrictive for talismans like this 2 weeks is. So you'll tend to see the moon, not in the 1st and the 10th, and I just tried to get the chart to look kind of as good as I could, and let the decision be made off of where, like, basically what house the moon was in at the time, coupled with a good ascendant. So that's why these look kind of different, kind of branching out and being a little bit more adventurous with these. So here we go. But this is an opportunity for a 22nd Lunar Mansion talisman, and the 22nd Lunar Mansion is one that's all about freedom and escape. And I really like the 22nd Lunar Mansion. I think it's a very fun one in that it's very loose with a lot of its meaning. So like freedom, what it means to be free is a pretty like personal thing, and it can be used a lot in different contexts. So I definitely recommend looking into how you might be able to spin whatever situation you're in as a freedom issue. So it can be used like obviously very literally to seek freedom from a thing or a place. Like if you feel like you are trapped in a unfavorable living situation, the 22nd Lunar Mansion can help you get out of that. Prison, legal issues, 22nd Lunar Mansion can get you out of it. But even kind of more like metaphoric trappings, like trapped in a dead-end job, trapped in a bad relationship, trapped with a bad habit, these kinds of things are also really great 22nd Lunar Mansion things to use, or things to use the 22nd Lunar Mansion for. It's very flexible, which is probably meaningful since its image is basically of Mercury. So there you go. In our election here, we've got the moon in the 22nd Lunar Mansion here in the 5th house, conjoined this Venus but separating from it. And at this time, she's applying the sextile to the sun in Scorpio, which I thought was very good because the sun can also be about like light and freedom, and a little bit more like autonomy and individuality, which, you need a certain amount of freedom to be able to express yourself, right? The moon is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, separating a sextile from Saturn, sextile from Mars, averse from Saturn. And the ruler of the 1st house is the sun here in the 3rd house. Cadent houses don't tend to be super great for the ruler of the 1st house, but I don't usually care about it, like I said before, unless it's the 12th. And at this time, the sun is far enough away from the conjunction of Mars and the square of Saturn to have to worry about them. And I liked this for this chart because it's like the sun, representing the person who the talisman is for, is leaving these very difficult situations symbolized by the square of Saturn and the conjunction of Mars. So I liked that better, and I guess if you want to look at it that way, the sun is applying this square to Jupiter, and while the squares are, more conflict-oriented or more difficult aspects, to Jupiter is, a better planet, is more of a benefic planet, so that square isn't as difficult as it normally would be. So I definitely liked this chart for a lot of kind of the symbolism baked into it about escape from difficult situations, leaving things behind you. So I definitely recommend looking at that one. if you think you could at all use it. So our next selectional opportunity for the Australian continent is going to be on November 12th at around 7:15 in the morning, and this is going to be an opportunity for a 26th Lunar Mansion talisman. So the 26th Lunar Mansion is primarily like a relationship talisman. It is one that is very focused on love, like what it means to love and to receive love and to feel love. It is not explicitly like a sexual or romantic in its nature. It can be romantic. I think it would be a harder sell for it to be like a sexual one. It focuses a lot more on pure relationships and on that connection, that power that connects people. It's a very Venusian type of a talisman, and it is for people to help strengthen their relationships, to help understand their relationships better, maybe to help them kind of understand like love languages is a thing that I think the 26th Lunar Mansion can help a lot with, help to improve and stabilize relationships that are going through. It help you remind yourself of like why you love somebody, whether that is, so it's really good for kind of repairing strained relationships, whether that's between like parent and child or spouses or friends or even like coworkers, like to kind of repair any kind of relationship, to help you remind yourself of like why you got into it in the first place, like why this is happening, why this was supposed to happen. The 26 Lunar Mansion is pretty good for that, and it's also useful for like the creation of relationships, for kind of like helping relationships start out on the right foot. So if you're like getting back in the dating game for whatever reason or anything like that, the 26 Lunar Mansion can be a really good ally to have in making sure to kind of help to weed out a lot of those more undesirable people or, you know, undesirable relationships that you aren't looking for right now. 26 Lunar Mansion is good for that. And in our election chart for this, we have the moon in the 26th Lunar Mansion down here in the third house. So typically, I'll get to that in a second. At this time, she is separating from this conjunction with Jupiter and applying to the sextile with Venus. Of course, this talisman is about very Venus-type things, so this connection with Venus is very helpful, and I like the fact that the moon is being venerated by the benefics. She's separating from the conjunction of Jupiter to then the sextile of Venus. Veneration is like the opposite of besiegement. So we have this very helpful, very uplifting power associated with these benefic planets that the moon is currently experiencing being woven into this talisman, while Venus, as a general significator of love and connection, is placed in the first house. The ruler of the first house is Jupiter down here in the third house, unafflicted by Saturn or Mars, too far away from that to have to worry about. And just generally, I like this chart a lot for that. So typically in, the thing I was going to say before I stop myself, typically in elections, you don't want the moon to be cadent. You want the moon to be more angular. But I make an exception, especially for the third house, which is the moon's house of joy, where I don't think that cadency is as much of an issue because the moon really, really does appreciate being in this house, probably more than she does most of the other houses. And at the same time, if you are ever in a situation where you have to make the moon cadent for some reason, or you know, like the moon's not doing so well, and you have to make the moon cadent for your election, having a benefic planet in the ascendant or the midheaven helps to stabilize it to where that benefic planet can kind of take over and do whatever the moon was supposed to do. So that's kind of what's happening in this chart. You could argue either the moon in the third house isn't a big deal because that's her joy, or the moon in the cadent house is a big deal because it's cadent, but it's fine because Venus is in the ascendant, helping to stabilize and strengthen the election. So it's just kind of a workaround for that whole situation. Let's see. My hair is a mess. I need like a haircut. It's all poofy everywhere. Like, ugh. And so that's all that we have for the Australian continent. Now we're going to move on to the North American continent, which has 3 electional charts to talk about. Our first one is going to be for November 8th at around 9:30 in the morning. This chart is set for 9:36, and this is going to be an opportunity for that 22nd Lunar Mansion talisman that I talked about in the Australian version. In the Australian chart, as you can see if you watch that section, compared to the North American chart is a little bit different. With the Australian chart, we had the moon in the 5th house with the Leo rising. Here we have the moon in the 1st house with Sagittarius rising. We don't want the moon to be more angular than this. because we don't want to get into Capricorn rising, as then we'll have to deal with the Mars-Saturn square, and we're not going to do that. We're just going to skip over that entirely. But the 22nd Lunar Mansion is one that is about freedom and escape. The 22nd Lunar Mansion is a fun one, as there's kind of a lot of things you can do with it because its theme is so flexible. It's primarily about escape. So this can be utilized, very literally for like escape from bad situations, escape from, bad living environments, help you to relocate somewhere else. But it can also be used a little bit more metaphorically, escaping from, dead-end jobs, escaping from despair. It also has some medicinal qualities, so it can be used to escape from illness and pain. And it also has a kind of side hustle, we'll say, to where it can be used to help suppress rumors and gossip, especially if they're about you. So very useful, kind of all around a good talisman to have in your pocket. In our election chart here, we've got the moon angular in Capricorn in the 22nd Lunar Mansion conjoined Venus. Separating from this conjunction of Venus, going to the sextile of the sun. The sun is always a really fun planet for Lunar Mansion talismans. You guys know, I always try to get the sun sextiles or sun trines anytime that I can. And especially since the sun and its powers of like light and clarity and vision, and like expressing oneself in individuality, I think can be very helpful for the 22nd Lunar Mansion talisman, since it tends to be very difficult for people to be themselves when they feel constrained or trapped or imprisoned in some way. The ruler of the first house in this election is Jupiter here in the second house in Aquarius, unafflicted by Mars and Saturn, just chilling out in the second house, and that's fine. Our next electional opportunity for the North American continent is going to be for November 12th at 8:20 in the morning, and this is going to be an opportunity for the 26th Lunar Mansion talisman. The 26th Lunar Mansion is one that's primarily about like relationships, and sort of like the more pure archetypal expressions of love and connection, the things that bring people together, the reasons why people have been brought together, those kinds of things. The 26th Lunar Mansion can be really helpful for helping to strengthen relationships by sort of reminding people why they fell in love, why they got together, and that can be both in like romantic context or in like a friendship or a familial context. It's just kind of like the pure love. There's not necessarily like a sexual thing behind it. And it's more just about like exploring that, helping people come together, helping people understand one another, that kind of thing. It's a very Venusian type of energy, very like almost motherly in a way, but like not at the same time. It's kind of difficult to describe. But the main reasons why you would make this talisman are to help you through a relationship rough patch, help remind you of why you fell in love with somebody, what you saw in somebody in the first time, help you kind of reach that unconditional. That's the word that I've been looking for. The 26th Lunar Mansion is more about like the unconditional love, and help you kind of reassess that, help you realize that. It can also be used for creating relationships at the get-go, to help you make sure that they're on that right path, rather than, whatever it is that relationships can turn into these days, I guess. So very helpful if you're on the lookout, active in the dating scene. The 26th Lunar Mansion can really help you kind of parse out or kind of prune out the people who are not, looking for the same thing in life at that time. Taking a look at our election chart for the 26th Lunar Mansion, we have the moon down here in the 26th Lunar Mansion. At this time, she is separating from the conjunction of Jupiter and applying to the sextile of Venus. The sextile to Venus is, of course, very good because this is a talisman that is very Venusian, very much about love, relationships, connecting, and Venus is super involved in that, so this is an excellent planet to have the moon apply to. Being venerated by both benefics with the moon is definitely very useful. I super like this election just for that reason alone, but the moon being in the third house, in the house of her joy, I think is also very useful for this. Typically we want the moon to be more angular, but I don't consider the third house to be a bad cadent house. Well, the third house is not a bad cadent house. It signifies good things, but when it comes to like the moon's ability to do things, typically you want her angular, and I am typically more sensitive to the moon in cadent houses, except for the third, because it's traditionally the house of her joy, and I think she really does well there. At the same time, the ruler of the first house is Jupiter here, and Jupiter's doing fine down here in the third house. He's unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. I feel like there was a reason why I wanted this chart to have like such an early Sagittarius ascendant, but I can't remember what it was. I know that I wanted to keep the nodes off the ascendant, so if the nodes being this close to the ascendant bothers you, I typically use like a 5-degree rule for houses. You should be able to move this down. Our issue is we want to keep Venus in the first house, and we don't want Saturn to reach it. I know we don't want to go into a Capricorn ascendant because Saturn will be the ruler of the first house, but I don't. Oh, I think what we're trying to juggle here is Sagittarius rising, but keeping the moon in the third house. I don't want the moon to go into the second house. The second house is fine for angularity, but like second versus third wins every time. So I think that's kind of the thing that we're doing here. So let's kind of explore this a little bit. Moving the chart forward in time. And yeah, so you don't want to go to like past like 20 degrees Sagittarius, I guess. So this is one of those charts where you have like a decent amount of a window to do. Like the original chart that I looked at was set for 8:20, and this chart here is at like 9:16. So you've got like an hour to make the talisman or for the talismanic window. But yeah, so that's kind of what you're juggling. Keep the moon in the third house. Don't let Capricorn rise, which it isn't going to as long as the moon's in the third house. So you can kind of get the moon. You can get Venus into the first house kind of as much as you want while also keeping the moon in the third house. Just don't let her pass the third house cusp. Our third and our final electional chart for the North American continent is going to be for the next day, November 13th at 9:45. And this is going to be an opportunity for a 28th Lunar Mansion talisman. The moon is just freshly entered into the 28th, the final Lunar Mansion at this time, at 17 degrees and 17 minutes of Pisces. The 28th Lunar Mansion begins at 17 degrees and 8 minutes of Pisces, I believe. So we're right into it. And the 28th Lunar Mansion is one that is about fishing. It is about collecting fish. But using that as a metaphor, it is about the presentation of opportunities, with the fish sort of representing income streams, or because, fishermen, it's either, a lot of times in traditional magic, we'll see talks about like agriculture or fishing or hunting. And these can be extrapolated today to be more about like income and security. That tends to be the themes that are involved, because it's either agriculture, growth, food that is used to like feed the community, so more about security, having that need met, or selling that to other people. So farming, agriculture as a living. So that's where we kind of get the wealth aspects involved in these kinds of talismans, and that gets, of course, put onto fishing and hunting as well, where it's very similar. It's either food for the community, addressing a basic need, or it is extra provisions to sell as one makes their livelihood. So it tends to bring in the wealth. So that's how we go from fish to opportunities for income. So the 28th Lunar Mansion is traditionally the one that you use to increase fishing yields. And so I like to use it to increase opportunity yields. Very useful for securing more clients if you work in any kind of field that does that. Commissions, sales, anything like that. Like each fish sort of represents another sale or a client or somebody to hire you another job. Like it's especially useful for people who work in kind of situations where clients are like where you make money sort of one-to-one, whether for like clients or commissions. Not so super useful if you just kind of like work hourly, but I would argue that you could probably use it to like secure a better job or get better opportunities within your position. So something to look into for that. But in this election chart, we've got the moon down here in the third house in the 28th Lunar Mansion. At this time, she's applying a trine to the sun, and I always love those sun trines as much as we can. The ruler of the first house is Jupiter here in the second house, so focus more on money and finances this time. Unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, the moon and the sun are both unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. The ascendant degree is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. Venus as a benefic planet is in the first house. So there's a lot of really good things here, especially I like that Venus rules the 10th house in this chart too. There's some really great stuff here for the 28th Lunar Mansion to kind of help lift up, what's it like, the rising tide lift all boats kind of thing. That's what we're going for this talisman, but you can't start it too super early. So like this chart is set for 9:45. The earliest you'd be able to do it is 9:31. So like 9:30 to 9:45, I guess, would be your window, or I guess to be more lenient, until Capricorn rises. So from 9:30 to 10 o'clock is kind of what you're going for there. So that was all for our North American electional charts, and now we're going to move on to our Western European and North Africa elections. And our first one is going to be for November 8th at 4:41 in the morning, and this is that opportunity for the 22nd Lunar Mansion Talisman. And this one's kind of fun because in all three locations, the 22nd Lunar Mansion election has looked different, which I think is kind of fun when that happens. So in the Australian version, Leo was on the ascendant. The Moon-Venus conjunction was in the fifth. In the Moon-Venus conjunction was separating in the fifth. In the North American one, it was Sagittarius on the ascendant. Yeah, it's Sagittarius on the ascendant, Moon conjunction in the first. And then in this one, it's Libra ascendant with the Moon actually applying the conjunction to Venus in this one, not the Sun like it was in the other ones. In the third. So just kind of like some fun different stuff going on here. So the 22nd Lunar Mansion, like I talked about in the other sections, is primarily about freedom and release. So it's really fun. It's very flexible in what exactly freedom means, freedom and escape to be specific. So it's more specifically about like escaping from incarceration or imprisonment. So, you know, if you're somebody who is currently facing like a legal situation, the 22nd Lunar Mansion, like that's its job to help you get out of that situation. But it can also be used for like escaping undesirable situations kind of in general. So it can be about relocation, moving somewhere, whether that's, you know, somewhere safer, somewhere better, somewhere where you have more opportunities to advance or be successful. It can be escape from, you know, depression, escape from fear, escape from bad habits, escape from monotony, escape from all these things. Just trying to find that way out. The 22nd Lunar Mansion is very successful at doing. It also has a medicinal aspect of it, to where it can help people recover from illnesses, kind of a freedom from pain situation, and also a sort of side gig as a binder of tongues is kind of how the Picatrix phrases it, I think. And it's about suppressing rumors and gossip, especially if it's about you, keeping you kind of out of the rumor mill, essentially, which is very helpful in today's world. Thank you, thank you, ancient sages, for discovering these uses of these talismans for us today in 2021. So looking at our election chart, we have the moon here in the third house in the 22nd Lunar Mansion, which begins at 0 degrees Capricorn. She's applying this conjunction with Venus, who is the ruler of the first house. The moon and Venus are unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. Hunky-dory kind of a thing happening here. Typically, we don't want the moon to be cadent. I typically avoid the moon when she is in cadent houses for Lunar Mansion talismans. For talismanic collections in general, you want the moon to be more angular. But the third house, I think, is fine for the moon, if not, you know, one of the best ones, because the moon is in her joy in this house, which she seems to enjoy very much. Our second electional opportunity for the Western European and North African continents is going to be for November 11th at 17:10. So like 5 minutes after. Ooh, what time is this? 5 p.m.? Yes. Yes. Oh, Lord. So 10 minutes after 5 p.m. And this is an opportunity for a 25th Lunar Mansion talisman. The 25th Lunar Mansion is primarily about plant growth. It's about protection of crops, for the protection and cultivation of plants is primarily what it's for. We can then go on to kind of like extrapolate themes of wealth and wealth increase and investment with this talisman because of the connections between agriculture and wealth and needs being met historically. So you can, if you're somebody who's into gardening or, you know, you're a farmer, the 25th Lunar Mansion and its like very literal manifestations can be exactly what you want for helping plant growth, helping to protect plants, helping to keep plants healthy. Can be perfect for you. But if that's not your game, then it's totally fine to use the 25th Lunar Mansion for help in investments. If you're somebody who works in finance or is interested in finance and investing, working like playing the stock market, cryptocurrencies, things like that, the 25th Lunar Mansion can be very helpful for protecting and increasing your investments. In our chart here, we've got the moon in the 25th Lunar Mansion applying the conjunction with Jupiter in Aquarius, which is very great. You have to be a little bit careful though, because the 25th Lunar Mansion actually ends at 21 degrees and 35 minutes of Aquarius. So this is at like 20 minutes of arc later it ends, which will be about an hour of clock time. So you have to be very careful about that one. So we've got the Moon-Jupiter conjunction here, which is good, unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. The ruler of the first house is Venus because Taurus rises. Venus is in the 9th house, which is fine, I guess. Venus is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. Don't you like it when I'm like, it's fine, I guess. Venus is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, which is really the more important thing. The goal with this chart, why this chart looks kind of strange, is I really wanted to make something of the Moon-Jupiter conjunction as much as I could, and I liked that it happened in the 11th house, and I was trying to get this conjunction kind of as angular to the midheaven as I possibly could, while kind of like straddling the line here of this Taurus ascendant. Because if you go too early with the Taurus ascendant, then you run into the square and opposition of Saturn and Mars. You don't want that. So there's like a sweet spot in Taurus, which is about here. But if you don't like the opposition that the ascendant has with the sun, then you might not want to make this talisman, because I'm not sure there's an alternative that is really meaningful. Because I usually give about 5 degrees for aspects to the ascendant, and any house cusp, really. So about 5 degrees. So that means that to avoid the opposition with the sun, you would have to go to like 14 degrees Taurus, which is the thing we can do. We can do that. We have the power. Which puts you within 7 degrees of this and 6 degrees of that. So like the 14 degrees Taurus mark might be like the perfect eye of the storm kind of a situation to get you through it. Because if you go later than that, I'm sorry, but with that I mean if you go to like the other end, like the 19 plus 5 to get to like to the I went hours. That's not good. So if you do like the 19 plus 5 to get you to 24 degrees, kind of like past it on the other side, you can do that, I guess. But then you just get like the node closer to the ascendant, which can be a problem, and there's just like it's the thing. So this one is a little bit more tentative in its positioning or in its timing, so just kind of watch out for it, kind of play with it as much as you can, but there's not really a whole lot of room there to mess with. Our third electional opportunity for Western Europe and North Africa is going to be for November 12th at 9:41 in the morning, and this is an opportunity for the 26th Lunar Mansion talisman. The 26th Lunar Mansion is one that is primarily about relationships, reinforcing relationships, strengthening relationships, creating new healthy relationships, and these can be any kinds of, or like many kinds of relationships, I guess I should say, not any kind. The 26th Lunar Mansion is primarily more focused on either like romantic love or kind of like unconditional love. So it's love that can go in many different places. It can be relationships between spouses is kind of probably the more obvious solution, but it can also be between friends. It can also be between family members, any person that you're close to that you like genuinely love and enjoy. To be around the 26th Lunar Mansion can help you get more out of, or help you resolve or fix. It's primarily like the apology talisman is what I think of it as. It's the talisman for helping people get back on the same page, for helping people understand why they care about one another to begin with. It's not super into like the sexual side of things like we saw in like the 13th Lunar Mansion, but it's really more about the heartfelt unconditional connection between two souls is really where the 26th Lunar Mansion shines. So useful if you're going through a relationship problem, if maybe not a problem, but it's just kind of like stale, or if you're somebody who is currently looking to create a new relationship, the 26th Lunar Mansion is exactly who you want. In our electional chart here, we have the moon in the 3rd house in the 26th Lunar Mansion, and she is separating from the conjunction of Jupiter in veneration and sextile to, and applying the sextile to Venus in Capricorn in the 1st house. This is a talisman that is very Venus-like, all about love, connection, and relationships. So having this connection, this lunar connection here with Venus is super useful, super powerful, and very on brand, we'll say. The moon is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. She's definitely shielded between the conjunction of Jupiter and the sextile of Venus, something that Bonatti calls veneration, as sort of like the opposite of besiegement, which I super like. At the same time, the ruler of the 1st house is that Jupiter because Sagittarius rises. The ascendant is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. Jupiter is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. Really kind of the only negative thing, I guess you could say, about Jupiter is that it's pretty cadent in this chart. We get this Venus as very angular in the ascendant, or as very angular in the 1st house, not in the ascendant, I would say, which is really useful. One thing that you might think about is you could Oh no, you probably couldn't. I was going to say that you could try to move this time forward to get Venus more angular, but the issue is that the moon is actually very close to moving out of the third house, so you wouldn't really have much room to work with to push Venus further towards the ascendant. So this would kind of be the it. This would be it, kind of. Sorry. So our last electional opportunity for Western Europe and North Africa, and for our video, is going to be on November 13th at just after 8:30. 2036 is what this chart is set for. And here we're going to wrap up the video, the episode, with a more standard Ryhan Lunar Mansion election. As you can see, the moon is back conjoined the midheaven, as I typically like to see her. This is going to be the opportunity for the 28th Lunar Mansion talisman. The 28th Lunar Mansion is primarily about increase of wealth or income, or it's more about like increase of opportunities, or being presented with more opportunities to be able to select from, opportunities gathering to you. So this can be really helpful, especially for people who work in fields that are more like client or commission based, where you kind of expect customers to come to you to hire you for your services, whether that is something that you do more like skill industries, but can also be about goods as well, or service industries, I guess is what I mean. But it can also be more about sales as well. But it's more about the being presented with opportunities to be able to make money from, or be able to increase one's livelihood off of. If you aren't involved in a situation like that, if you don't work in a kind of in a situation where that feels applicable, like if you work more just like hourly kind of a thing, that's fine. The 28th Lunar Mansion can also be useful to help propel you forward by presenting you with opportunities within that position to advance. So it's not completely lost on you, it's just a little bit, maybe not as helpful or as useful. This would probably be something that you would more want to turn to like the 11th Lunar Mansion talisman for, if you wanted to get like ahead in like an office job or like a salary position or an hourly position. The 11th Lunar Mansion is probably a little bit more suited for that need, but the 28th Lunar Mansion can't hurt. Looking at our election chart, we've got the moon here in the ascendant in the 28th Lunar Mansion, excellent. And at this time she's applying a super helpful trine to the sun. I always really like the trines to the sun whenever we can get them. So this 28th Lunar Mansion talisman might actually be a little bit better for those of you who are in that like hourly seeking advancement kind of position. Because the sun is all about like honors and advancement and prestige. At the same time, those who are more in like the commission based, or like the customers approaching you or the client work kind of situation, could also really benefit from the sun trine, because it's more about making yourself visible. So it's like making yourself more noticeable and hopefully more attractive to those potential clients. So there's an angle there for both types of people to potentially get some use out of this. The ruler of their first house is the moon, who was unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, so she's fine, that's fine. We always like it when the moon is the ruler of the first house, because it's one less planet to worry about. And then the ascendant degree itself is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. We have a nice trine from the ascendant to the sun as well. If you want to just dig really into the solar symbolism of this, knock yourself out. And that about wraps up our electional opportunities for our Scorpio New Moon, going to our Taurus Full Moon. Some really nice things to work with, and I've really sort of enjoyed sharing with you guys, I guess, the Lunar Mansion type talismans I don't normally show you, because I tend to focus so much on showing you guys like the really safe, really obviously good ones, with the moon very angular. So being able to show you guys some of these more we'll call them less great, less obviously good elections, but still useful, is kind of nice. And also gives me something to talk about in a time where, even though all the planets have come out of a retrograde phase, they're still like hurting each other. So until they can play nice, this might be how we have to do things. But hopefully by the time we come to our Taurus full moon, we won't have to worry so much about some of them. But you guys take care, and I will see you guys again for our Taurus full moon, which I think is going to be an eclipse. So let's just start buckling up our seatbelts for that.